My name is Susan Grant, and this is an American story about survival, silence, and starting again. I was 22 when I gave birth to my son, Owen, in a small Boston hospital on a cold January morning. Snow pressed against the window like sheets of white glass, and the room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear. I was exhausted but happy, still clutching my newborn when my husband, Richard, leaned over the hospital bed and whispered words that would carve into me forever. I didn't marry you for children.
Keep him.
Get out. At first, I thought the painkillers were making me hear things. But then I saw the expression on his face. Cold, composed, already detached. He tossed my overnight bag onto the chair, turned on his heel, and walked out without a backward glance. No flowers. No car seat. No hand to help me stand. Just the sound of his shoes fading down the hall until there was nothing left but the beep of the heart monitor and the soft whimper of my child. By nightfall, I signed my discharge papers myself. The nurse who had helped deliver Owen slipped me a blanket and an old baby carrier someone had donated months ago. I thanked her through tears and took a cab to Somerville, to a rundown rental a friend from church had found for me. It was a narrow, two-story house with peeling blue paint, crooked steps, and a sagging porch railing. The air smelled like dust, lemon cleaner, and leftover coffee. I set Owen gently in a dresser drawer lined with one of my towels because I had no crib, no bassinet, nothing but him and the sound of his tiny breath. That night, I sat on the floor beside him and stared at the cracked ceiling. I owned one pair of decent shoes, a puffy coat with a broken zipper, and a bank balance of $184. Outside, cars hissed over the wet pavement. Inside, I felt the weight of the world pressing against my ribs. Every time Owen stirred, I whispered to him, "We'll be fine," even though I didn't believe it yet. The next morning, I called my mother in Ohio, praying for kindness. She sighed and said, "You made your bed, Susan. Lie in it." I called Richard again, but he didn't answer. That was when I stopped expecting rescue. When the landlord came to collect rent I didn't have, I offered to clean the hallways and scrub the stair rails in exchange for a discount. He looked at Owen's sleeping face, sighed, and agreed. I made 3 promises to myself that week. Feed my son, learn one new skill every month, and never let Richard see me beg. I meant every word. I found work answering phones for a moving company in South Boston. The office sat inside a dented brick warehouse with one flickering light bulb and a coffee pot that hadn't been washed in months. My pay was small, but I never complained. When the dispatcher quit suddenly, I learned his job within a week. When the owner realized I could balance the invoices faster than his accountant, I learned QuickBooks, too. I didn't sleep much, but every night when Owen was fed and warm, I told myself I was one step closer to something bigger. At night, after I put him to bed, I studied accounting, freight law, contract negotiation. My hands ached from typing, but I pushed through. I enrolled at Bunker Hill Community College, paying for one class at a time. Bookkeeping, data management, Microsoft Excel. My grades were near perfect. My professors called me determined. I called it survival. By the time Owen turned 3, I had saved just enough, $900, to buy a second-hand sedan with a dented door and no air conditioning. It was freedom on 4 wheels. On weekends, I used that car for courier runs. Owen sat in the back in a booster seat with a blue dinosaur pattern, humming while I drove through rain and fog, delivering small packages to warehouses around the city. I'd hand him a granola bar, check the map, and whisper, "We're getting there." The car heater barely worked, and I'd sometimes drive with gloves on, but I didn't care. We sang along to country stations and counted the miles out loud. Every mile was proof that we were moving away from the woman who had once been thrown out of a hospital room with a baby in her arms. When bills stacked up, I took on cleaning jobs at night, offices, small retail stores, anything I could find. I'd carry Owen asleep on my back in a carrier, vacuuming around desks and filing cabinets, pretending we were explorers on a mission. Those nights were hard, but they also gave me a sense of control. I wasn't waiting for anyone to save me. I was saving myself, one invoice, one delivery, one sleepless night at a time. I never spoke Richard's name again. He became a ghost I refused to feed. Whenever I looked at Owen, I saw the future, not the past. I promised him he'd never see me crawl. For years later, I moved us to a slightly better apartment in Quincy, still small but clean, with 2 bedrooms and a view of a maple tree that turned bright orange every fall. The rent was $1,050, and every time I mailed the check, I smiled. I'd earned it. That first Christmas in Quincy, we decorated our tree with paper stars and ribbon because ornaments were too expensive. I still remember Owen's laughter when I plugged in a single strand of white lights, how the glow reflected in his wide eyes. "It's perfect," he said. And for the first time, I believed it was. I didn't know it then, but that tiny moment, the light, the laughter, the quiet pride, became the foundation of the empire I would one day build. Everything I learned in those years, the discipline, the grit, the way to keep going when the road looks endless, would become the muscle behind my success. I told myself a new story every night before bed. In America, you can start small and build. You just have to keep moving. And I did. When Owen turned 7, I had saved exactly $11,300, every dollar earned from double shifts, courier runs, and bookkeeping work I'd picked up on weekends. That money wasn't much by corporate standards, but to me, it was seed money. Hope for money. Enough to start something of my own. So, one overcast spring morning, I signed a lease for a small office behind a tire shop in Chelsea, Massachusetts. The rent was $750 a month. The room had 2 folding chairs, a chipped desk, and a window that looked out at a chain-link fence. It didn't matter. I called it Susan Logistics, printed business cards from my old printer, and told myself this was the beginning of something that no one could take away. My first contract came from a small manufacturing company in Worcester, delivering specialty automotive parts to Providence twice a week. It paid $4,200 a month, steady, reliable, and just enough to keep the lights on. I hired 2 drivers and 1 part-time clerk, promised them honesty and regular pay, and ran dispatch myself. I learned every route, every delivery code, and every client's coffee order. I answered the phone on the first ring, always with a smile, even when it was past midnight. By the time Owen started middle school, we had grown from 2 trucks to 6, then 10. The office walls were still the same faded beige, but the energy inside was electric. Every week brought new shipments, new clients, and new spreadsheets full of numbers that actually added up. I reinvested every cent I could. No vacations, no luxuries. I wanted growth, not comfort. The business needed me to be lean, alert, and forward-facing. 2 years later, I bought my first home, a modest ranch house in Quincy, for $236,000. The siding peeled, the roof leaked, and the front steps wobbled, but it had something I'd never had before: permanence. There was a maple tree out front that turned a brilliant orange every fall, and I told Owen it was a sign that we were finally rooted somewhere. He painted his room dark blue and taped a paper sign to the door that read "Future CEO's Office." I laughed, but a part of me hoped it was true. I spent long nights balancing invoices at the kitchen table, drinking reheated coffee, while Owen worked on homework beside me. He was quick with numbers, sharper than I'd ever been. When he turned 13, I taught him how to read a profit and loss statement. He loved it. He'd sit across from me, his eyes scanning the columns like puzzle pieces, asking where each dollar came from and where it went. He started visiting the warehouse on weekends, greeting drivers, asking questions about routes and freight costs. When he turned 16, I handed him $1,000 and said, "Invest it, don't spend it." He researched for days, then proudly announced he bought shares in a small trucking exchange app. Every Sunday night, he'd show me the chart on his laptop, explaining market movements like a young professor. I'd smile and nod, proud but cautious. I'd spent years fighting to stand on my own, and now I was raising someone ready to take the baton when I couldn't run anymore. By my 34th birthday, Susan Logistics had outgrown its small beginnings. We added a brokerage arm, taking on new contracts that doubled our volume. I hired Tessa Morgan, a sharp logistics planner from Chicago who could quote freight classes faster than anyone I'd ever met. Together, we opened 2 new branches, one in Lowell, another in Hartford, Connecticut. Within a year, our revenue crossed $18 million, then climbed to $32 million. I still drove a used SUV and packed peanut butter sandwiches for lunch. That humility kept me grounded. Success didn't change me, it focused me. I bought a brick townhouse in Beacon Hill for $1.8 million, paid half upfront, and financed the rest on a fixed rate. It had white shutters, a garden terrace, and a heavy oak door that I painted red. I hung a brass letter L on the knocker, a small reminder of how far we'd come from the blue house in Somerville where everything began. Then, one night, while reviewing bids in my Beacon Hill office, Tessa slid a file across my desk. "You should look at this," she said quietly. It was a vendor application from Grant Industrial Supply, based in Springfield. My fingers froze. The name was unmistakable. I flipped the pages, and there it was, Richard Grant, owner and CEO. My ex-husband. I stared at the logo, an outdated design in dull blue font, the kind of branding that screamed decline. His insurance certificate was set to expire in 2 months. His balance sheets showed 60-day delays on payments, and his loan terms were bleeding interest. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from recognition. The empire he had chosen over me was collapsing. I said nothing to Tessa. I simply placed the folder aside, closed my laptop, and drove home through the quiet city streets. That night, after Owen went to bed, I opened a new folder on my computer and labeled it Winter Plan. Over the next several weeks, I began tracking every piece of public information I could find. Liens, judgments, auction notices. I subscribed to trade bulletins, learned the names of his lenders, and found that Valley Commonwealth Bank held his largest credit line, secured by his warehouse and machinery. The interest rate was 7.5%, and the bank's filings showed late payments. That told me everything I needed to know. I knew the pattern. A man like Richard would overextend himself, confident that charm could fix math. He'd borrow more to cover old debts, shuffle invoices, delay payables, and convince himself he was one deal away from turning it all around. I'd seen that arrogance up close. The difference now was that I had numbers on my side and time. That summer, Owen graduated from Northeastern University with honors and a partial scholarship already renewed for graduate school. On the day he moved into his apartment near campus, I handed him a key card to our new headquarters in Boston's Seaport District, a gleaming glass office worth $4.6 million. Inside, the walls gleamed white, the hallways smelled of fresh paint, and the reception desk bore our logo in silver letters. "This is our house too," I told him. "Buildings are only walls. People are the business." He smiled, slipping the key card into his wallet. "What about him?" he asked quietly, meaning his father. I paused for a moment, looking out the tall window toward the harbor, where cranes moved like patient giants in the fog. "Not yet," I said. "But soon." As I walked him out that evening, I realized how poetic it was. The man who once abandoned us had built an empire that was now rotting from the inside. And I, the woman he threw away in a hospital room, was preparing to buy it piece by piece. Brick by brick. I still remember the first time I drove past Grant Industrial Supply after so many years. It was a gray Tuesday, the kind where rain falls sideways and every road looks tired. The factory sat on the edge of Springfield, Massachusetts, its concrete walls streaked with rust and soot. The sign above the entrance, once bold blue letters, had faded to a dull gray. Trucks idled in uneven lines along the loading dock, their engines rumbling like weary lungs. A manager stood under the overhang smoking, checking his watch every few seconds, as if waiting for a miracle that would never come. I parked across the street and watched. Sometimes you don't need a spreadsheet to see the truth. A failing company has a certain look, the slump of its workers' shoulders, the way no one laughs at lunch, the flicker of fluorescent lights behind dusty windows. Grant Industrial looked like that. Once, this place had been Richard's pride, his empire. Now it was just another story of arrogance and decay. I wasn't there for nostalgia. I was there to start what I called the quiet net, a web of small, deliberate moves that would tighten over time until the entire structure was mine. No noise, no headlines. Just precision. A week later, I met with a loan officer at Valley Commonwealth Bank, the same institution that had financed Richard's last expansion. He didn't know who I was. To him, I was simply the owner of Maple Street Holdings, a low-profile investment group registered out of Boston. Maple Street bought distressed commercial debt, paper that most banks wanted off their books. It was a clean, legal way to collect leverage. The bank was happy to sell. For $640,000, I purchased a portion of Grand Industrial's outstanding loan, just a slice, small enough to go unnoticed. Then I bought another. Then another. Within 6 months, Maple Street Holdings quietly owned $3.2 million worth of Richard's corporate debt, along with the mortgage on his warehouse and a lien on his machinery. Piece by piece, I was buying the floor beneath his feet. At the same time, Susan Logistics was expanding fast. We had just signed a $12.5 million lease-to-own deal for a new distribution center in Worcester. It gave me the perfect excuse to hire maintenance teams and equipment specialists familiar with Grand Industrial's machines. I didn't need the metal. I needed the knowledge. The better we understood his operations, the easier it would be to replace them when the time came. Owen came home from Northeastern University that summer, taller, sharper, and far more confident than I'd ever been at his age. He joined the company as an operations analyst, but within months, he was managing contracts on his own. One night, as we sat in the office reviewing invoices, he pointed to a line item on a report and said, "Mom, look at this pattern." I leaned over. Grand Industrial had stopped paying its primary steel supplier 3 months earlier. The supplier had responded by filing a UCC financing statement claiming priority over certain receivables. It was a textbook move in corporate law, a signal that the clock had started ticking toward collapse. 6 months, Owen said, tapping the document. Maybe 3, I replied. We both knew what that meant. It was time to move. Over the next few weeks, we approached 3 of Grand Industrial's top clients, mid-size manufacturers who relied on his supply chain. We offered them better pricing, faster turnaround, and guaranteed distribution through Susan Logistics. Our proposal was clean, efficient, and backed by a reputation we'd spent a decade building. One by one, they signed with us. The shift was quiet but devastating. Richard's revenue began to drain, not in one dramatic loss, but in small, constant leaks. By the time he noticed, it was too late. Cash flow tightened. Payroll became a struggle. The building that once buzzed with activity began to fall silent between shifts. While he scrambled to survive, I continued tightening the net. I found out which creditors he was late paying and offered to buy their invoices at a discount. Most of them agreed. They wanted cash now, not promises later. I built a folder full of names, numbers, and dates, my map of his downfall. Then came the official notice. Valley Commonwealth Bank had called the loan. When a bank does that, it means one thing: the end is near. Soon after, the sheriff's department posted a foreclosure notice on the warehouse gates. An auction house listed the equipment: forklifts, CNC machines, office furniture, everything not nailed down, for sale the following month. The debt stack totaled around $9.4 million, but on paper, the assets were worth maybe $6 million on a good day. I remember sitting at my kitchen counter that night, the foreclosure notice open on my laptop, a cup of coffee growing cold beside me. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, not for revenge alone, but for justice. I wanted him to see that the woman he had thrown out with a newborn had built an empire strong enough to buy his world piece by piece. Still, I felt a flicker of something complicated, maybe pity, maybe memory. I pushed it down. Justice can't live beside sympathy. The next morning, I called the auction house and reserved a front row seat. I wired the deposit under Maple Street Holdings, careful to keep my name out of the paperwork. Then I created a second bidder, North Star Ventures, a clean new LLC under Owen's control. We would move in sync, one bidding, one observing, ensuring we never drove the price higher than necessary. For the next few weeks, I barely slept. Every detail had to align. I met with our legal team, reviewed purchase terms, and prepared transfer documents in advance. Tessa coordinated with the warehouse staff to absorb new contracts as soon as the auction ended. Owen built a transition plan that would bring in 25 new hires within the first month. We weren't just taking over a company, we were reclaiming history. One evening, Owen stopped by my office with 2 cups of coffee. "You know," he said, "it's strange. He used to have everything. Cars, property, power. Now he's the one drowning, and we're the ones holding the rope." I looked at him carefully. "We're not holding the rope, Owen. We're cutting it." He smiled faintly. "Do you ever feel bad?" "Not anymore," I said. He chose this the day he told me to get out. He built his empire on cruelty. I'm just collecting what's owed. By early June, the final foreclosure date was posted in the Springfield Republican newspaper. The auction was set for the following week. Richard's empire, once sprawling and proud, had shrunk to a list of item numbers on an inventory sheet. The woman he discarded had become his creditor. The son he rejected had become his competition. And the quiet net I had woven, patiently, carefully, over 25 years, was ready to tighten. The morning of the auction arrived heavy with summer heat. June in Springfield, Massachusetts, always carried that thick, dry warmth that clings to the skin. The warehouse where the auction was held smelled of oil, old metal, and dust. Sunlight poured through the high windows, cutting sharp beams across the concrete floor. Every sound echoed: the scrape of folding chairs, the murmur of bidders, the shuffling of papers that would decide the fate of a man who had once decided mine. I wore a white shirt and dark flats, my hair tied in a low knot. I didn't want to stand out. Owen stood near the front, dressed sharply in a navy suit that made him look older than his 22 years. He held a clipboard, his expression calm but alert. To everyone else in that room, he was just another bidder representing a young investment firm. To me, he was the living proof that I'd survived everything Richard once tried to destroy. The auctioneer, a fast-talking man in a blue suit, adjusted his microphone. Around us, clusters of men whispered over bidding sheets. Tool dealers, scrap buyers, warehouse developers. I recognized a few faces from trade conferences. Some nodded politely, others ignored me completely, too focused on the deals to come. Then, just before the first lot was announced, Richard Grant walked in. Even after all those years, I recognized his stride, confident but slightly hollow now, as if the air had shifted around him. He looked older, his once dark hair shot through with gray. His suit hung loose, his tie slightly askew. I watched his eyes sweep the room, full of disbelief and pride he couldn't quite hide. When he spotted Owen, he frowned. There was something familiar in the young man's stance, but he couldn't place it. He didn't see me standing in the shadows by the pillar. Not yet. Lot number 1, the auctioneer called, his voice booming. Stamping press line. Model 205. Starting bid, 1 million. The room came alive with motion. Bidders raised their paddles in quick succession. The numbers climbed fast: 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 million. North Star Ventures, Owen's company, entered at 1 point and held strong. When the gavel dropped, the machine was ours. Lot number 2, CNC Milling Systems, 8 units total. The auctioneer rattled off the specifications. The bids jumped again, this time between Maple Street Holdings, my quiet investment firm, and a dealer from New Jersey. I let them drive it up before taking it cleanly at $640,000. Each lot brought us closer to what I'd waited 25 years for, the moment Richard would realize who was behind the curtain. Finally, the auctioneer adjusted his glasses and said, "Next, the main property, Grant Industrial Supply's primary facility, located here in Springfield. Opening bid, $2.5 million. A hush fell. Everyone knew this was the big one. Owen lifted his hand. 2.5. The numbers climbed. 2.7. 3.1. 3.4. A developer from Hartford hesitated, then shook his head. 3.6. Owen said steadily. The auctioneer scanned the room. Any further bids? Silence. Sold. The gavel slammed down. Applause rippled through the room. Part politeness, part surprise that a company so young had just bought an entire industrial complex. The auctioneer grinned at Owen. Congratulations, son. Nerves of steel. Only then did Richard finally turn and see me. For a heartbeat, time froze. His eyes widened, disbelief flickering into horror. I watched the recognition wash over him like a wave he couldn't outrun. His mouth opened, then shut again. He looked from my face to Owen's, and in that instant, everything connected. When the auction ended, it took 3 hours to finalize the paperwork. The building keys, cold and heavy, passed from the auctioneer's hand to Owen's. Together, we walked to the glass office at the back of the warehouse. It had once been Richard's command center. The blinds were crooked, the floor sticky with years of spilled coffee. The desk still smelled faintly of his cologne. In the top drawer, I found an old photograph, me, younger, smiling, standing in the yard of our first home. He had kept it face down, buried beneath invoices. The door creaked. Richard stood there, pale and shaking. "You can't do this," he said hoarsely. "This is my life, Susan. My company." I rose slowly, holding his gaze. "You told me to keep the child and get out." "I did. I kept the child. I got out. Then I built a life. Now I'm buying yours." He swallowed hard, trying to recover his composure. "I had a bad run, that's all. I can fix it." I shook my head. "You had 25 years to fix it. Here's what happens next. You gather your personal items, and a security officer will escort you out. Your severance agreement is in the envelope on the desk. It's fair. You will not contact my staff. You will not contact my son." "Our son," he said softly, his voice trembling. Before I could answer, Owen stepped forward. His tone was calm, steady, and measured. "I am her son," he said, "and we're done here." Richard's eyes flickered with a mixture of anger and shame. For a moment, he seemed ready to argue. But then he looked at Owen, really looked, and something in him broke. He nodded once, quietly, and turned away. His footsteps echoed down the hallway until they faded into silence. I stood there, breathing slowly, letting the reality sink in. The woman he once abandoned in a hospital room had just bought his empire and taken it apart piece by piece. By evening, the locks were changed. The crooked blinds were replaced. Our maintenance teams moved in, cleaning, rewiring, and repainting. The machines hummed again, under new ownership with a new purpose. We signed 3 new client accounts that same night. By August, the entire plant was running smoother than it had in years. That weekend, I drove back to Boston. My red door gleamed in the late sunlight, and fresh flowers brightened the stoop. Owen arrived later with takeout and a stack of papers, net margins, staffing plans, and a draft of the new sign for the Springfield plant. The logo read, Susan Grant Manufacturing. The letters were bold and sure, just like the journey that had brought me here. As we ate dinner, Owen leaned back in his chair and asked, "Do you ever think about that first night? The one in Somerville?" I looked out the window at the city lights and smiled. "Every day," I said softly. "But I think about this more." He nodded, a quiet pride settling between us. Because this was more than business. It was proof. Proof that a woman can be thrown out of a hospital room and still find a way to buy the building where she was once told to leave. Proof that losing everything doesn't end the story, it only starts a new one. This is America. You can fall, rebuild, and rise higher than the ones who pushed you down. You can write your own bill of sale in plain ink with your name, your real name, on the last line.